My name is Anna Whitaker. I served 17 years in silence, not because I was weak, but because someone stronger on paper wanted my command and rewrote the record to take it. At family dinners, they toasted my brother's promotions. At the Pentagon, they filed my missions under his name. They thought I was erased, but someone forgot to destroy the last letter, the one my father wrote, the one they never meant me to read. Before I show you what was buried beneath the medals, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been written out, of history, of credit, of your own story, hit that subscribe button, because tonight the silence ends, and the record is corrected. I kept my spine straight, eyes on the crystal stem of my untouched glass. The overhead chandelier cast a polished glow over Brandon's gleaming uniform, as if even the light bowed to his medals. The air was stiff with pressed collars, engraved cufflinks, and the kind of laughter that always ends in a sideways glance. A folded letter dug into my rib from inside my purse, like a thorn I chose to keep. My father's last words to me, scrawled in shaky ink and sealed in silence for years, had been buried under my silence too long. Tonight, that silence would fracture. "Anna," my mother said as a server brushed past with the duck confit. She didn't look at me, just nudged the conversation to include me like one would push a forgotten fork into place. "Still floating between jobs?" I didn't answer. I let her words hang like smoke. Let her feel the void she expected me to fill with shame. Brandon laughed, tipping his glass toward a group of younger officers who had yet to realize this family was a minefield. "She's probably writing poetry in a cabin somewhere. Very patriotic." The men laughed. One of them, Lieutenant Myers maybe, glanced at me with that mix of pity and confusion I'd grown used to. To them, I was the sibling who never quite followed orders. Invisible. Or worse, unexplainable. "Actually," I said, carefully slicing a piece of lamb, "I just got back from a recon in northern Syria. But you know how paperwork is. Classified means I don't exist." Brandon's fork paused midair. My mother's eyes didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened around her napkin. The chandelier glinted in her diamond brooch as she turned back to the table. "Your brother was just promoted. Lieutenant Colonel. Full honors. A rare accomplishment at his age." She lifted her glass again. "To legacy," she said. "To power," Brandon added, eyes sliding to me. I smiled. Quiet. Precise. Beneath the table, my phone buzzed, a vibration that didn't belong to group chats or spam calls. The number on the screen was one I hadn't seen since I left Langley. Unlisted, encrypted, a ghost from a life I never spoke of at this table. Red crest alert. Call initiated. I excused myself, rising with my wine still untouched. My heels echoed on the marble as I stepped out into the foyer, heart suddenly beating in its own drill cadence. I pressed answer. "This is Whitaker." A pause. Then, low and unmistakable. "Commander Whitaker, we need you back." "Red crest is active. Protocol Omega-9. My breath stalled. That protocol hadn't been invoked in over a decade. Not unless something was wrong. Very wrong. "Understood. Timeline? Briefing window is 72 hours. You'll receive logistics within the hour." The line went dead. Behind me, I heard the faint click of heels. I turned slowly. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, suspicion resting like a pearl on her lips. "Who was that?" she asked. I slid my phone back into my purse and met her eyes without blinking. "The Pentagon," I said. "Apparently I'm still their commander." I wasn't supposed to exist in the system anymore, but someone just used my override code. The cursor blinked on my encrypted terminal like a dare. My hands hovered over the keyboard, uncertain if typing the next command would summon answers or an arrest warrant. The screen flashed red. Clearance expired. Before jittering, then stabilizing. For a moment, the Pentagon's interface didn't recognize me. Then it did. Then it didn't again. I tried once more, this time with the failsafe. "Code: Whitaker Omega 7 Delta. Access denied, it chirped, robotic and final. But then, another window blinked to life. An activity log. Someone had used my override code 3 days ago, at 2:17 a.m. from within CONUS, and it wasn't me. My mouth went dry. I stared at the metadata, my breath shallow. Julia Reeve, of all people. Julia had served under me during the Paraguay extraction. Sharp, unshakable. The kind of junior officer who always asked the right questions and never pushed to be seen. She vanished from the radar after that mission, transferred, supposedly, to logistics in Nevada. But now her credentials were smeared all over my override log. The screen glitched again. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled under my chin. The apartment was dead silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of my refrigerator. Outside, DC's November night draped the windows in shadows. My boots were still by the door, crusted with mud from last night's dinner. Veterans Day, indeed. I opened the letter again. The ink was faded in places, smeared as if written in haste. I'd read it too many times to count, but tonight, my eyes snagged on the last line like it had just appeared. Trust only the one who never wanted to lead. My father's handwriting was shaky but deliberate. That phrase never made sense before. Now it rang like a code phrase. I turned the page over. Nothing. Then I held it against the desk lamp. A faint, unnatural shine emerged along the crease. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out the infrared filter I hadn't used in years, and scanned the page. There it was. A long alphanumeric string embedded in the fibers of the paper, invisible to the naked eye. Quickly, I typed it into a separate decryption terminal. What unfurled wasn't just text. It was a schematic, a location marker. Military. Precise. Fort Meade, Secure Archive Zeta. Access route Vault 3C, Project Red Crest, Physical Manifest. My stomach turned. Red Crest wasn't supposed to have a physical component. Everything, every operation, every post-mission record was digitized and wiped on completion, unless someone had preserved the original archive off-grid, and unless my father had known. I stared at the map glowing on my screen. Route markers, building layouts, fail-safe procedures, all logged with his handwriting in the metadata. It was like he had anticipated this, like he knew someone would erase me. I packed the terminal into its EMP-shielded case and slid it into my duffel. Then I grabbed my father's letter, folded it once, and tucked it against my chest plate. I paused before opening the door. The city buzzed faintly outside. Streetlights blinked like silent sentries, and I knew what had to come next. I made it to my car in under 2 minutes. As I turned the ignition, the overhead lamp flicked on. I looked at myself in the mirror. Messy hair, eyes like flint, jaw set like a storm front. I gripped the steering wheel. If I want answers, I'll have to break into my own command system. The woman who once called me ma'am now won't even open her door. I banged harder this time, fist against metal, the hollow clang echoing through the narrow hallway of the worn-out apartment complex in southeast Baltimore. The paint on the door was chipped, the air thick with the staleness of burnt toast and damp laundry. Apartment 4B, Julia Reeve's last known address. No answer. Reeve! I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut drywall. I know you're in there. I just want to talk. A beat. Silence. Then, just beneath the threshold, the slightest shuffle of feet. I exhaled through gritted teeth. The night's drive from Fort Meade had left me raw. Nerves frayed, eyes gritty from fatigue, jaw locked since the moment I'd seen my brother's name begin to emerge in the Red Crest access logs. Brandon wasn't just nearby. He was in it. And Reeve. Reeve knew. She had always known more than she let on. I leaned closer to the door. You owe me, Julia. You remember Paraguay. You remember what we burned to keep buried. A minute passed. Then the lock clicked. The door opened a crack, chain still latched. Not here, came a hoarse whisper. Meet me at Jenkins' Diner in 20. You're not the only one there watching. The door shut again. Jenkins' diner was a relic from another time. Vinyl booths, brass fixtures dulled by decades of cigarette smoke, and waitresses with the kind of deadpan kindness only a night shift can teach. I chose a booth near the back, facing the door. A waitress in her 60s poured me black coffee without asking. She looked at my face for half a second too long, then said, "Rough night?" I offered a tight smile. "Something like that." She nodded and walked off. Reeve arrived 10 minutes later, hood up, sunglasses on despite the overcast morning. She moved like someone who expected betrayal at every turn, which meant she finally understood the game she'd been playing. She slid into the booth across from me, peeled off the glasses, and studied me like I was a mission file she didn't want to read. "I don't have long," she said. "They track cell pings near this place." "Then let's not waste time." I leaned in. "Why did you use my override code? And why is my brother's name in the access logs?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out a flash drive, wrapped in a napkin. It hit the table with a soft thud. "Before they shut Red Crest down," she began, voice low, "I made a mirror backup, full snapshot. It was illegal and stupid, but I knew something was off when they said we had to purge the archive in 48 hours. No review, no audit. Just wipe and walk." "You kept it this whole time?" She nodded. I couldn't let it go, especially after what they did to Marcus. Her brother, court-martialed for dereliction of duty 2 years ago. Rumors said it was political, a sacrifice to protect someone higher up. "They told me if I didn't cooperate, they'd make sure Marcus never saw daylight again," she said. "So I gave them your clearance path, just the protocol string. I didn't know they'd rewrite you." I clenched my fists under the table. "You were never deleted, Anna. Just buried, rewritten under someone else's clearance chain." "Brandon's." Her voice cracked on the last word. I took the flash drive, hands shaking. "Everything's on there?" I asked. "Every directive, every login, every edit they made to your personnel file, every mission reattributed." I stared at her, a mix of fury and pity churning in my chest. Reeve had been a soldier, a damn good one. But fear had turned her into an accomplice. And now she was trying to climb back toward redemption. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "They made me choose." I said nothing. I plugged the flash drive into my secured burner laptop. The screen blinked, then loaded the interface. Dozens of files. Hundreds. One folder stood out. Red Crest, override logs, Whitaker, Brandon. I opened it. Chains of commands. Deployments. Final approvals. All signed under Brandon's credentials, but routed through my old clearance. He hadn't just stolen my position. He'd stolen my legacy. I stared at the screen, breath locked in my chest. He used my identity to seize Project Red Crest. They said the hearing was informal. They lied. Every chair had a camera, every senator had an agenda, and Brandon was already seated at the center table. The Pentagon Annex hearing room was colder than I remembered. Fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting everyone's skin in a clinical, colorless wash. I walked in wearing the dark navy suit I hadn't touched in years. Hair pulled back, no medals, just silence and steel. Brandon was already smirking. He wore his uniform like armor, polished to a shine, shoulder tabs sharp enough to draw blood. He didn't look at me. That was the tell. He always looked when he thought he was winning. I took my seat across the aisle. 3 senators sat at the front, flanked by 2 Department of Defense legal advisors. A staffer clicked on a recorder. Another handed me a bottled water I didn't touch. "Commander Anna Whitaker," the chair began, eyes level. "You've requested to present evidence of misattribution of service and the improper use of defense authorization protocols. Do you confirm?" "I do," I said, my voice flat but steady. The title still felt foreign, Commander, but I let it echo in the room. Let it settle like dust on polished marble. "I have a decrypted file," I continued, pulling the flash drive from my pocket and handing it to the aide. Sourced from Julia Reeve, formerly under my command. It includes override access logs, mission reports, and falsified clearance entries. All routed through my credentials, but post-dated, after I was officially marked inactive. Brandon leaned forward. I'll object to any data provided by a disgraced officer. Reeve's brother was court-martialed. She had motive to tamper. Colonel Whitaker, the chair interrupted. You'll speak when addressed. I turned my gaze to the screen as the data loaded. Line after line of protocol entries, operational check-ins, encrypted timestamps, signed by my ID, erased from my record, repurposed under Brandon's chain of command. One senator shifted in his seat. Another scribbled something, then paused. Are you saying, the chair asked slowly, that you led active classified missions that were later attributed to your brother's chain? I'm saying I never stopped serving. They just stopped seeing me. Brandon laughed. Short, hollow. Deepfakes, he said. The tech's out there. This whole thing is a digital revenge fantasy. Silence. Then the side door creaked open. Julia Reeve stepped in, out of uniform but with shoulders squared. She held a manila envelope like it contained a grenade. I wasn't called, she said to the chair, but I need to be heard. The chair glanced at his aide. The aide nodded. Proceed. Reeve took the witness chair. Her voice was calm, quieter than mine, but her words cut like wire. I was on the Red Crest decommissioning team. I was ordered to wipe project files, but I made a backup. I used Commander Whitaker's credentials to preserve the integrity of the archive. What I didn't know, until now, was that her clearance had been rerouted to Colonel Whitaker behind closed doors. She opened the envelope and slid a packet forward. These are physical copies of the original access logs. Dated, stamped, untouched. Her identity wasn't deleted. It was overwritten. The room went still. Brandon's hands balled into fists. One of the senators leaned forward. Colonel, would you care to respond? He stood, his voice cracked. It was never hers. It should have been mine. There it was. No legal jargon, no polished deflection, just raw, feral entitlement. It should have been mine, he repeated, breathing hard. She abandoned the system. She disappeared. I did what I had to do. The committee chair folded his hands. And in doing so, you committed multiple breaches of federal code, including impersonation of a defense officer and obstruction of classified operations. The silence that followed was longer this time. Then the chair turned back to me. Commander Whitaker, he said, this time with no irony. We will need to verify one more document, your father's sealed transfer order, the one rumored to contain his final amendment to the Red Crest chain of command. I reached into my case and pulled out the folded letter. I already have it, I said. My father's handwriting was jagged and faint, as if he wrote it while running out of time. The paper trembled between my fingers, not from cold, but from something deeper. I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of silence pressing in on all sides. Outside, the city buzzed with November wind and distant traffic. But here, it was just me. And the last page. The top half was nearly unreadable. Ink smudged, letters trailing off like unfinished thoughts. I held it to the lamp. The words emerged slowly, painfully, as if he had etched them with his breath. Evelyn refused the transfer, said it would shame the family. She claimed Brandon was built for command. And you weren't. I disagreed, vehemently, but I wasn't strong enough to fight her outright. I stopped, my throat tightening. So I filed the order through Naval Channel 27, the old secure relay. It should be archived, sealed but traceable. I kept a physical copy, gave it to her, told her it would be hers to decide. Someday. Someday. That word had lived in the folds of this letter for years, waiting to bleed into the light. I looked over at the coffee table. The flash drive still lay where I'd left it, beside the encrypted tablet now filled with official committee transcriptions. Brandon's confession was already circulating in closed-loop channels. He would be court-martialed, maybe worse. But none of that felt like victory. Not yet. I pressed the final page to my chest, letting its corner dig slightly into my sternum. Then I closed my eyes. He stood in the doorway of my childhood room, backlit by dusk, the ribbons on his uniform catching the last of the day's sun. "You know," he said softly, "some medals are earned in silence. No ceremonies, no flags, just quiet defiance." I sat cross-legged on the floor, still in fatigues from basic. "You think I'll make it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he stepped inside and knelt, resting his hand on my shoulder. "One day," he said, "they'll call you what I always did, Commander." And he smiled. Just once. A knock broke the memory in half. I stayed seated, staring at the door. Another knock. I opened it slowly. Evelyn stood there, spine straight as ever, coat perfectly tailored, eyes bloodshot but dry. She said nothing, just extended a white envelope, her gloved fingers barely brushing mine. I took it. She turned and walked away. No words, no apology, not even a glance. The door clicked shut behind me. I returned to the couch, peeled the envelope open, and unfolded the paper inside. There it was, the original, crisp signature, dated, stamped, authorization in black and gold ink. Effective immediately, Project Red Crest Command is transferred to Commander Anna Whitaker, per revised chain of oversight. I exhaled, a sound between grief and closure. I stood, walked to the kitchen sink, and struck a match. The duplicate letter, the one I had carried for years, curled into flame in my hand. I held it long enough to feel the heat race up my palm before dropping it into the basin. The smoke rose like a whisper, tracing the air before dissolving. I looked at the fire and whispered to no one. This doesn't end with me going back. They offered me my old office. I asked for a classroom instead. The podium was polished, the banner crisp. Recognition ceremony for exemplary service. The kind of event that always felt like it was for someone else. But today, it was mine. And I stood beneath the seal of the Department of Defense, medals pinned to a uniform I hadn't worn in years. Annapolis in December was cruel with wind. The air bit through fabric and memory alike. Still, I stood tall. The committee chair cleared his throat. For honorable service and ethical fortitude beyond command, we formally reinstate Commander Anna Whitaker to full active duty, effective immediately. Polite applause followed. A few midship cadets stood at the back, in formation, stiff-backed, their eyes flickering with something more than discipline. Recognition, maybe. Respect. I stepped forward. The medal was heavy. Not physically. Ceremonial medals rarely are. But in its meaning. They had erased me. Now they were trying to reprint my name in gold. I accepted it. Then I spoke. "I appreciate the reinstatement," I said, "and the rank, but I won't be returning to my old post." A ripple moved through the crowd. "I've requested use of an old lecture hall just off the East Wing, room 205. It's where they used to store old uniforms and out-of-date manuals. Starting next semester, it'll serve a new purpose." Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. "I'm launching the Whitaker Institute for Ethical Command, a space for service members, especially women who've been written out, silenced, or told they didn't belong. We'll study patterns of institutional erasure, and we'll train leaders who remember what silence feels like." Julia Reeve was standing near the rear, arms crossed, her mouth curled into the faintest smile. Her eyes met mine. She didn't need to nod. We were past that. I scanned the audience. Brandon wasn't here. Of course not. Evelyn wasn't either. And yet their shadows stretched across every tiled inch of this hall. "They tried to write me out," I said, voice steady. "Now I write the next chapter. For all of us they buried." No one clapped at first. Then a cadet started. Then another. It wasn't thunderous, but it was honest. I stepped off stage. As I walked down the aisle, a young woman in uniform, maybe 20, stood at attention. She saluted, crisp and perfect. "Commander Whitaker," she whispered. This time, I heard it. Outside, the wind pulled at the corners of my coat as I walked toward the flagpole at the center of the academy grounds. No cameras followed. No fanfare. Just me, my boots against the gravel, and the quiet resolve of someone who'd made it through. Not to return, but to rebuild. I reached the base of the flagpole and looked up. The flag stirred, and so did something in me. They offered me my old office, the cold, wood-paneled room where I used to sign deployment orders, lead briefings at dawn, and once received the command to shut down an entire operation. Now, they call me Commander Whitaker with a reverence that feels foreign, as if it had always been there. But I didn't return for a title, and certainly not for their forgiveness. I returned to decide where I belong, and more importantly, to open doors for those like me who were once pushed out and erased. I asked for a classroom, not a command post, not a boardroom with one-way glass, and definitely not a polished cell dressed up as prestige. I wanted a room with a chalkboard, with students, with eyes that ask questions, and a space where answers didn't need permission to be honest. When I stepped onto that stage to accept the commendation, I was standing on two versions of time. One was the version of myself they had tried to bury, omitted from records, stripped of voice, dismissed as inconvenient. The other was the version I rebuilt, brick by brick, document by document, truth by stubborn truth. My name didn't need to be engraved in gold. It had already been written in what they tried hardest to hide. I'll never forget Brandon's face when the hearing turned against him. He had believed the system would carry him forever, that medals and maternal favoritism would drown out the facts. But what he never understood was this. When you strip everything away from someone, you also strip away their fear. And my mother, Evelyn, didn't speak when she handed me the original letter from my father. No apology, no tears. But I didn't need either. Some truths, when finally uncovered, don't need to be explained. They are the explanation. After the ceremony, I walked alone toward the flagpole. The December wind bit through my uniform, reminding me of cold nights in Kandahar, where I stayed up holding casualty reports, thinking of the names never spoken at memorials. People like me. People who had commanded, who had shouldered the consequences, but who were erased with the stroke of a pen. I stopped beneath the flag. A young cadet saluted and whispered, "Commander Whitaker." No one had told her to. There was no script. But I heard it louder than any battlefield order I'd ever received. In that moment, I knew I wouldn't return to the old role. I wouldn't sit behind a command desk and pretend nothing had been broken. I chose to write a new chapter, not just for myself, but for everyone they tried to write out. My father's letter remains intact. The paper yellowed, the handwriting shaky, but the transfer order he left behind is still valid. I keep it in the drawer of my new office, tucked beneath the lesson plan for my first class. Erasure is not defeat. Silence is not consent. I don't know how many others are still fighting invisible battles within the system, those who never got called by the rank they bled for. But I know this. If someone knocks on my door, hands trembling from years of silence, they will find me there. Not as a myth, but as a witness. And perhaps that's the quiet triumph no system can take back. Because in the end, justice isn't loud. It doesn't march in with brass and banners. It whispers in the pause after truth is spoken and lingers. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. And sometimes, all it takes to rewrite the ending is someone who refuses to disappear. They tried to erase me. They gave my rank, my missions, my legacy to someone with medals, not merit. But the truth doesn't vanish. It waits, quietly, until someone opens the drawer and says, "No more." Thank you for watching Anna Whitaker's story. If it resonated with you, leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe if you believe stories like hers, stories of truth, dignity, and silent strength, deserve to be heard. Until next time, stay grounded, stay watchful, and never let the system decide your worth.